right. Hey, Philip.
Hey, Sam. Good to see you.
Definitely. And so, well, I'll a little out of focus. We're going to go ahead and let me just go ahead and get started here. And I'm going to share the screen as I get going. 1 second. And then here we go. And then I'm going to start the broadcast. Perfect. All right. Well, here we are. So starting with the, just want to welcome everyone to the Rewards Mastermind. We're here to discuss some pretty exciting topics today as we're looking at new enhancements in the Gradar tool, and then also how to have agile compensation practices across the globe with all that's happening in the world today. We need to make sure that we are having more agile practices that are going to survive all the changes. And so we'll talk a lot about that. Now, typically we do have Howard Niswitz join us on these calls, but Howard is in Italy right now, enjoying the wonderful weather. He's been sending some great pictures, and so I'm quite jealous. But he's having a great time over there. So we'll join him. He'll be joining us again next month on the Rewards Mastermind. But we do have our esteemed colleague here, Philip of Gradar, and he's going to be leading the discussion on how to have those more agile compensation systems in place, so we can navigate all the pressures of the world today. So, namely, I mean, right now we're dealing with inflation and supply chain issues. Of course, that's called the inflationary pressures and lower economic or just economic activity for every country just about out there. Of course, we've had the global conflict, the Ukrainian situation that has sparked energy crisis that has further inflamed inflation. So there's a lot of things there. But before we get into jump on those issues, Philip, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself and Gradar for those people that have not that are not familiar with Gradar, and let's start there.
Well, my name is Philipp Schuch, or Schuch, like the Germans would say. I'm based in Germany, and I'm the founder and today's CEO of the company behind Gradar.com. Gradar is a point factor-based job grading system, and we use it as the foundation for many different features that are connected to building job architectures, like integrated competency profiles, equal pay analysis, compensation structuring, benchmarking, and all of these things. So privately held, sorry, that's no venture capital, just privately held. So I'm not playing the VC game, but I can talk a lot about bootstrapping and the pains that go along with bootstrapping.
Yeah, and we have to have a whole entrepreneurial show on that alone. So, but congrats for staying out of that mess. So anyway, so Philip, I know that you have a long history in compensation, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got into comp, and then also the different organizations that you're involved with now? Because I know that Gradar itself is a data-driven tool, and having that scientific method is quite important, especially in our current environment. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the business?
Well, I studied economics and media studies, got my degree, and then went to IBM, to Big Blue, and as an intern really for 6 months. And there I was in their HR department and was quickly tasked with some analytics. And this is what I liked. I liked the numbers, not so much the people. So from there, I moved on to back then Watson White, where I stayed for almost 4 years, left them to a client, the classic, and worked for them as a compensation benefits manager. for a couple of years, and did the same for another company and yet another company. And at the end, I was a director for compensation benefits as well as HR systems. But in parallel, I created Gradar because I felt that the market needed something that did not exist yet, which is an independent tool that independent consultants can use and that clients can use without having to hire a consultant. Yeah, and this is the niche that we are playing in.
Yeah, I know. I'm a Gradar user, and so I love the way that the simplicity of the tool is built out, so it's easy to use and in the compensation practice. And of course, we're talking today on how it can increase your agility overall as a compensation practitioner. But before we get in there, I'm excited to hear more. I know that you have a background in economics, and a lot of strange things are happening in the world today, right? As far as inflation and as we were mentioning, due to the pandemic, supply chain and energy shocks and so forth. So can you give us a brief overview of I know you have clients all over the world.
Well, the book doesn't tell us anything about it, so.
Yeah. So, but what are you seeing today across the globe and different markets, and how compensation practitioners are reacting?
I think you mentioned a couple of things early on. So there's inflation, which means there's a high pressure on salary increase budgets. On the other end, there's a lot of uncertainty how the business is going to develop. So there's a certain level of reluctancy from boards to grant adequately high budgets for salary reviews. So that's one problem.
Yeah.
Then, and this is something that you did not mention, we have a demographic crisis. And I think we have known for years that this would happen, but I think it kind of was accelerated during the COVID pandemic, that many of the boomers already left the workplace.
Yeah.
It doesn't look that they are coming back. So without COVID, they might have remained on their positions for a couple of years to come. And so with COVID, many of them said, okay, let's get out of here and stay safe, stay at home, and enjoy the pension. And I think this contributes to the labor market crisis that we have.
Right.
And it's crazy. It's not only about software developers, but it's about HR personnel. It's about finance personnel. It's engineers in general. It's all across the job families that we see an acute shortage of labor. And when you look at the unemployment rates in all of the large developed countries, they are low. They're really low. And prices for labor are going up. So there is definitely an issue with supply and demand. Demand is rising and supply is going down. So prices are going up. That's what I remember from economics. And that's actually in the book. So
yeah, that's right. Well, one thing I was just heard a briefing from ITR Economics in the U.S. about the U.S. market, and very similar, the U.S. market and the U.K. market has experienced high inflation, more than what they've seen in 30 years. And as a consequence, we have a lot of employees that are hearing this. I mean, for instance, in the U.S., the number that was broadcasted out across news media was 8% or 8.5%, I think, last month, year over year. And so employees immediately said, "Well, geez, I need to get an 8% increase in my pay to react to that price increase, right?" But that's typically not what we see as far as practice, because when we have at high, inflation is something that is very erratic, especially because of energy prices. It can go up and down. And the forecast that I've seen for both US and the UK is of course there's supposed to be this huge increase in inflation this year, but most economists believe that it's going to abate a bit next year and going on. It's still going to be like a 4% is what they're forecasting. but it's going to trend, hopefully trend back down to normal. What's your expectations across the globe that compensation practitioners are talking about?
Well, let's talk about my wife first. She's in procurement.
Okay. Yeah.
And she's a head of procurement for a firm over here in Germany, and she's seeing the troubles of the supply chain firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Minor computer chips that used to cost maybe $1 are now, if you have to buy them on the spot market, at maybe 70, 80, or even triple digits.
Oh.
This is crazy. And you can't even be sure that you're going to get them from those dealers. Because some of them are just, looking for the highest bidder. And if the next day someone is going to pay them 150, they're going to sell to this one. So this is a huge problem. So they might even ship them to Europe. And just like with liquefied natural gas, the gas is on the ship is on the ocean, and then the highest bidder is going to get it. So right. it's absolutely crazy what the supply chain does at the moment. And we are not even through the worst of it yet, because China is really, really strict about COVID. They still kind of believe in a no COVID policy.
Yeah.
So they put all of Shanghai into lockdown, but this was a real lockdown, not like the ones that we saw in Europe and then in other places. So nobody could leave the office, their house. Nobody could go to the office or the plant. So there's no activity in the for unloading the ships, the logistics, everything stood still. And this is going to have a huge effect on supply chains during the months to come.
Yeah.
We're trying to buy bikes for my children, and there's just no selection available anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Or there's no the brand that you typically look for is not there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there's a shortness in products, and with the logistics and the supply chains in trouble, we don't even have the ships that need to go where they are supposed to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a huge problem, and we are not through it yet. So I think this is going to be with us for the next couple of years, probably.
Yeah,
which means that we're going to see disruption in different marketplaces during the years to come. So what I see from my compensation people is that they're trying to figure out how to deal with this. Not only their boards, but they themselves are very reluctant on how big, for example, the salary increases should be. It's very hard to rely on data, because we all know that whenever you are asked how big is your, or let's look at the last 10 years, whenever you were asked how big is your budget going to be, one replied 3%.
Right.
Yeah, that was the default answer. So, and this really reflected on the actual budgets. But right now, you can't really reply with the default answer, because 3% is certainly going to be wrong. Right. So the first indications are maybe from labor agreement increases, which we can see in some European countries. Some of them are based on inflation, like in Belgium. Some of them are based on union and employer negotiations. But even they don't know what to do. So, and those are very, very big unions that represent 3.4 million employees. So what we can see is that they have one-time payments, but they do not really go for very high permanent increases, because there's too much uncertainty for the employers as well.
That's right. Yeah, I'm hearing that same thing as well, as far as strategies of not being too aggressive. I mean, here in the United States, a lot of companies are looking at between 5 to 10% increases this year, is compared to their traditional budgets last year of 4%. So that's causing a lot of companies to, depending on what industry you're in, to rethink their hiring for this next year. So I've had some companies that have trimmed back their hiring like 25%.
Mhm.
than what they expected in last year for this year's growth, as a way to be more conservative, because we know what happens when we're hiring people in at these higher rates and that are demanded by the market right now, is it causes internal compression in the organization, and then you need to address salaries all across internally as well. So which I guess from a competitive standpoint, we should say there's people out there listening is, well, you should do that, right? And definitely we want to be competitive internally, but it all has to do with how much money that we have to spend on pay, and considering, and we also have to think about the health of the organization, right? Because when we're demanding higher prices for our products and services from our customers, and they're looking at the prices and they're going, oh my gosh, I don't want to pay that. They're curbing back their spending. That means less revenue coming in. And so businesses need to make sure that they're taking a conservative look on the future. So it is quite an issue.
There's one thing that comes to mind, and I'm pulling this up right now. So because there's a lack of information about the price of labor, and when we look at our well-known surveys from Culpeper, from Redford, from Willis Towers Watson, Korn Ferry Hay, and so on, they haven't really found a way to reflect on this in their survey methodology. They collect the data once a year, Culpeper being an exemption from this practice, and they publish the data once a year. So it's kind of outdated in the moment they publish it.
Yeah.
So there's a tendency that we can see, or we could see in the United States with pay factors and pay scale, that connected to HRIS and collected data in kind of real time, and then turned this into benchmark data. We can see the same happening in Europe at the moment. And there are two companies that I want to show you that do this. So there's, here, this is in German, that's interesting, just a second. So there's Figures HR, which is a French startup that said, okay, they focus on startups and scale-ups and try to give them, in a very simple way, market data. And that's a very recent addition to the market. There's Revio. I mean, sounds like ravioli, kind of. And they say they do real-time compensation insights. I mean, I'm always very, very reluctant to someone saying they do something real time, because there's actually a bill in the United States, I forgot what it is called, that forbids companies from sharing real-time information.
Yeah, that's true. And but nonetheless, these platforms are popping up. I know there's in the U.S. there's a one that's similar. It's called PAVE, P-A-V-E, that is doing real-time information. And then also we've heard in past forums when we had Justin from Compensation Tool, he has a new product called Squirrel, which actually looks out into the marketplace, like collecting nuts like a squirrel does, and looking at the postings, job postings, and pulling in that information in real time, so you can see some of that information as well. Yeah,
this one here, compensationtool.com. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, Justin Hampton. I mean, it's a pretty cool tool. I use it myself when clients are, especially right now when you're seeing offers go up so high. And right now, Squirrel, I think, is only available mostly in the U.S., but he plans on expanding it globally as well. But. And
what you described, that's actually quite an exciting additional trend. So in the UK, it is quite common that employers have to post their salary range in their job ads.
Yeah, and that's becoming more common in the United States. I mean, it is. I know the new Colorado law that was introduced requires that, but there's different practices and how employers are releasing that information, and some of them are releasing their internal lower half of the range, Some are releasing different ranges, or the whole range. So it's the practice around it is a little different. What are you seeing?
Absolutely, and it's completely irrelevant if you post something like 60,000 to 150,000 a year. This is no range. This is just being in compliance with the law.
Yeah,
kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
or 100 to 280 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm sure that there'll be pieces where that gets. Oh, go ahead, Jackson. You had a question?
No, so we did have some questions from the chat while we're on this topic, especially talking about salary ranges. We got one from Michelle, and she's saying that, in alignment with inflation and the salary increase expectations, we're seeing employees leaving and commanding higher salaries, and that's putting employers in a very tricky place. And then as a follow-up, are companies looking at inflation cost or cost of labor when they're looking at increasing their salary budgets? So a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, two good questions. Let's go with the first one first. I mean, the people testing the market. I'm seeing this a lot in the United States. There's employees know that there's high rates, that employers are desperate and are offering high rates right now. And so I've over the past 6 months, I've heard several stories of just candidates testing the market. So basically, they're in their job and they're comfortable in their role, but they're not. They just want to see what kind of increase that they can get, and so they're lobbing out high salary demands to people that are willing to hire them to see what they can capture. And so this has caused a lot of alarm, and some of my clients are saying, oh my gosh, the current rate is X out there. We have 3 candidates that are asking for this. And that's not necessarily always true. Some of them are really, a lot of candidates are throwing really high rates out there. They're not really, they're testing the market. But there are truly situations where there's 20% increases in previous expectations. And so it's hard to judge one way or the other. So I know that for sure. Are you seeing any of that, Philip, in other parts of the globe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's pretty much the same everywhere at the moment. But there's one thing that evidence can tell us, and this is evidence from academia. And we know with a high degree of certainty that pay satisfaction of individuals is kind of more strongly related with distributive justice in an organization then it is the absolute height of the salary, which means that if pay practices are equitable, so people get the same amount or a comparable amount for the same job or a comparable job at the same level of performance, then this is being perceived as fair. And fairness plays a big role in pay satisfaction. Yeah. So you can have an organization that pays less than others. And I mean, this is normal because not everybody can afford to pay the high rates and the high prices. But then your focus should really be on internal equity. So that's quite fun. And from my point of view, and this is the European view talking here, pay bands, pay structures, and not so much market comparison play a very big part in achieving internal equity, fairness, and consistency, and maybe even transparency when it comes to managing pay.
Yes, and I do believe that Europe and the European mindset on pay philosophy is something that's going to become more prevalent as fair pay and expands across the globe. I mean, it has to, right? I mean, we need to have a systematic way of looking at jobs and making sure that we're evaluating jobs fairly for fair pay to work, and also performance and how we look at experience and roles and so forth. So definitely, and we're going to get into that also in just a moment. But one other thing I just want to just mention is the other question that we had that Jackson brought up as far as the cost of living versus the cost of labor, and what should be impacting pay. What are your thoughts on that, Philip?
That's a tough one. And again, COVID accelerated the process, but we still haven't come to a good answer on this one. So in the past, it was very easy to say, you know, the market in California and San Francisco is this and that. And in Colorado, it's different. It's almost minimum wage. And in other states, it's different yet again. But that was always based on the location of the office. And now with remote work, what's the driver? Is it the ability of the company to pay or the profitability of the company that has an effect on the level of pay, what they can afford? And where does it stop? I mean, does it stop within the United States? Does it stop if someone went from Munich in Germany to, let's say, Frankfurt or Hamburg or somewhere to Leipzig in Eastern Germany, where cost of living is much lower than in Munich or Hamburg? Or does it stop if when you have someone working from Mexico or Canada or India? Would you still paying them the same amount of money?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really have a definite answer on this. I think some of the very large tech companies that are very open to remote work, they have already said, okay, they're going to pay anyone pretty much the same, indiscriminate of where they are based. And others, they're still trying to figure out what are regional pay differentials. Yes. But there's, and getting data for regional pay differentials, it is actually very, very hard. And in most countries, it's kind of impossible. So when I look at the service in Germany, you can't really get local pay differentials. And the same is true for most other European countries. Mm-hmm. It's easier in the United States, but when you look at them, often you don't really see much of a difference. So,
so that's true. Now, and one thing I would add to that is of course, and we were talking, I mean, you brought up remote pay and global nomad type situations and so forth, and where cost of living does come in. But then when we're looking at a traditional realm of building our pay policies and structures, you know, I think that when you're balancing the cost of living versus the cost of labor, first of all, it depends on your industry. But in most, you know, technology or private companies in the United States, cost of labor is definitely the dominant methodology. And of course, the difference is that right now, and when we're seeing huge spikes in the cost of living, that captures attention. And but we know that's a short-term impact, and then more of a long-term impact in pay is the cost of labor, which the cost of living is gets worked into that over time. So usually a year or so. So it is. So the cost of living is included in the cost of labor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But right now, the thing is that everybody's hearing about the cost of labor, and that's a top of mind for a lot of employees. And regardless if they're going to be working remote or whatever, employees always are looking for what's the highest the increase that they can get, right? Naturally. But if you look at the trends of cost of living over time and the trends of cost of labor over time, if you're paid on the cost of living, your pay increases would be much smaller on average, where the cost of labor has increased much faster over time. There might be a bigger spike now, but if you're to choose one of them, which would be better for you than long term, would be the cost of labor is the historic norm.
I mean, it's going to be exciting to see where people are going to move to or migrate to. And this might be domestic migration, moving out of California, going south, going to states where that maybe are a bit more liberal or conservative, depending on one's own interests, where there's maybe good education, where cost of living is low, especially if you can work remotely. So this is going to be very exciting to see. And some of the decisions are really short term. because some of the states, and then this probably starts in Colorado and goes down south, are going to have major problems with their water supply. So living there is not going to be any fun in the future. So a decision to move there today might really be a short-term decision for a couple of years, but nothing that will last for decades. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement around, and especially if we have more and more remote labor.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Philip, I'd love to get back to the conversation on determining fair pay and how to do that across the globe. I mean, one of the consistent problems that I hear about with multinational companies is it's very difficult. If you're sitting in let's say New York City or San Francisco, and you have different locations in, let's say, Turkey or Poland or Germany, with operations there, it's often very difficult to say, well, we have a vice president over here. What's the same size and scope of role in Germany or Turkey or in India? And so what's the best way of ensuring that we're measuring jobs effectively in those different regions?
Well, I think it's about speaking a common language, which is not Latin nowadays anymore, but greater. So, this is really it. You need to speak a common language to understand the requirements of the jobs in your organization. And this is best done if you use some kind of grading system of job analysis and job evaluation, because this removes a bias towards a title. And often, and I've seen this a couple of times with Redford matching, for example, and the title was VP. So it must be a match towards their VP and an executive career path. Mm-hmm. Which was not the case because it was not a VP role, but something like a team lead. So you can remove the title bias, and you can remove a cultural bias towards matching jobs, and make it really much more transparent of what kind of jobs you have in the organization. And that is only possible if you use some kind of grading.
Right, and I know that Gradar focuses around having those specific questions or questionnaire that's uniform and the job evaluation technique for each position, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can see it in the background. We have this grade map here. We have a career path for individual contributors, one for project management roles, and another one for people management roles. Mm-hmm. And that's really the essence of the Gradar system. I mean, if you want to, I can show a couple of things. I think it.
Sure. I think that'd be great to see that, but it's really important, I think, that for us to talk about the difference between the two methodologies, the two main methodologies of job evaluation. In the U.S., a classification method has been used for years, and that's what you were talking about as far as matching the surveys. We look at that leveling guide. We think about the function of the position. We put it in a box and we level it, and then we call it good. So yeah, it's
like this example from Culpeper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think this is non-analytic. It's not job grading. It's leveling. It's job classification. Yeah. So you look at all of this together, at the overview, at the complexity, at the degree of independent judgment, and at education experience. And then, oh yeah, it's a P2. That's it. What I've experienced recently is, because all major software compensation survey vendors use this type of methodology. And some of them have introduced some kind of AI. And those AIs, they have this awful tendency towards the middle.
Yeah.
So you submit your jobs, and for whatever reason, because I don't understand how their AI works, those systems will often suggest to match the incumbent against the middle level. And so in this case, the P2. So I think we're going to have some problems with survey data in the future. So a higher spread of data on the P2 level and maybe less differentiation or less matching towards P3 and P1. And this is something that I'm a bit unhappy with what Mercer does. So I did a couple of survey participations during the last year, and it's not really pretty what they do at the moment.
Some of the things that you're seeing, the reversion to the mean, is that where you're seeing more and more? Yeah. Okay. And, and of course, when we're looking at doing fair pay across the globe, I mean, that doesn't help us, right?
Not really. And when I look at what, for example, the European Union with their ideas for a new pay transparency directive, what they are planning to do is it very much looks like they are asking for some kind of point factor based job grading that needs to be in place in companies with at least 250 employees.
Oh.
It has not yet been fully negotiated. So it's still open to debate between EU Parliament and the member states, but something is going to happen. And the EU Commission wants something to happen. Maybe it's not going to be as strict as they suggested earlier, but I think something is going to happen, and probably compliance will be required in 2024 or maybe later. So there's still time to prepare, but something is coming.
And for Philip, for our listeners out there that are not familiar with that technique, could you kind of quickly show them, what that looks like? Taking
point factor. So in point factor based grading, you would, and of course I'm going to use my grader system as an example. In a point factor based system, you would go factor by factor. So you would decide for one of those career paths with the description, and then go factor by factor. So you would start with maybe the requirements in terms of professional knowledge needed. So there's a description available, and then there's a selection, in our case, of 9 different levels of requirement. So here, level 6 is the level of an undergraduate degree or bachelor's degree. And there's a definition of what it means. And it has been aligned with the so-called EQF levels from Europe, or when we look at other language packs, it has been aligned with, so this is a language pack for East Africa. It has been aligned with some of their local educational levels. And then you would look at what kind of experience is needed. And that's not only about the years, but it's about what the years mean, what kind of problem solving is needed. Yeah, so it's really point for point, or factor for factor. You go through this, assign a certain amount of points, and then at the end of the day, everything is being summed up. So we're looking at what kind of process involvement do we have for the job holder, what kind of functional responsibility is assigned to the role, and what kind of communication are we going to talk about. And then the system calculates a grade. In this case, it's a grade 12. Mm-hmm. And what makes our system stand out a bit is that we will translate this towards compensation survey codes, as well as competencies from TMA's competency library. So we're really bridging the gap between compensation, benchmarking, and talent management.
So a lot of times, I mean, you come across people say, oh, okay, it's great. You have those compensable factors that are used uniformly across the organization. But then you have a person say, well, I'd like to see this particular compensable factor, and can we add this, or what do you tell your clients when they say, well, I want to see a customized approach that's different in our company compared to what Gradars currently offers? And what would you say to that?
Well, I would tell them, are you prepared to spend months on designing your own bespoke grading system? Mm-hmm. Are you prepared to not use the default features that we have in Grader and build everything yourself, like the translation between your grade structure and compensation surveys, the translation between your grade structure and the TMA competencies, and so on. So, I mean, it makes sense to have a standard system because it works out of the box. But if you have time and if you have the nerves and the interest to build your own system, why not? I mean, we've just done this for a very big African government that is going to use this for their 300 and something entities to grade about 1 million jobs. But it took them a year to do that.
Wow. Yeah, I know that's I think that people don't understand the details behind a point factor methodology. When you have something that's laid out and it's been tested globally, you can put a lot of faith in that particular model. And pursuing a custom point factor methodology is tough, right? It's not just the time of testing, and it's never right the first time, right? Because you see, oh well, this factor has too much weight, it's skewing the results. Then you have to adjust it, and you have to go back and test it again. I mean, it's just a tough process.
Yeah, you know what we did, because we had a couple of prospects who were looking for a software to use with their own bespoke system, and so we said, okay, let's strip our software of our grader algorithm and use it as a white label solution, and we call it jobevaluation.net, your open grading framework. So you can put basically any job grading, systematic in here, and move from Excel onto a software as a service. And it's fun. We've got a couple of clients that use this, and but it takes time to set this up, because nothing works out of the box. Everything has to be defined from scratch. So it's really a green field where you've got to start. And it's never going to be as good as a thoroughly tested and internationally used system, where we will find bugs and fix them right away. And because here you're kind of on your own a bit, because you are the developer of the system,
right, of
the algorithm.
Well, it's great to know that you're the expert and the authority on this out there. So if anybody's thinking about doing this either on their own or would like to use a defined system, reach out to Philipp. He knows it all.
And it's actually very cheap. Yeah? So it's just 5K euros a year or $6,000 a year, and a little setup cost. So it's really cheap, but it's fun nonetheless. And sometimes when they start. When those clients start using the system and start setting up the system, they realize that maybe going with the standard system wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, right. So now, I mean, we were talking about the importance of having a consistent methodology of job evaluation for the purpose of fair pay and consistency in the future. So, what's the next step? Now we've graded all our jobs and we've got them, we feel like they've been calibrated and so forth. What do you see that's the next primary step companies are moving towards?
I think a standard step is, and this is something that I can show yet again, is to map their employees against the jobs. This is something that you've got to do, either because you want to do an internal analysis or you want to do a competitive pay analysis. So when I look at a compensation analysis, like this one here, we would see and this is general information, and this is not even sales or anything, you would see the distribution of salaries across the grades in your organization. And you can see how close they are together. So those lines are the median and the percentiles, and you have the numbers here. And this works out of the box here in the grader system. And I mean, this is something that you can do in Excel, but as soon as you start filtering on, let's say, a job family, like software development, this becomes very hard to do in Excel. So now here we have the results in grader right away. And so that's one thing. And this is something that can inspire the design of an internal pay structure or compensation structure, like pay bands. Let's use them. And it's just an example, obviously. So here you would see the points, and the points are individual employee salaries. So you can see how well they fit into the pay structure. And then in this case, we have defined pay bands with a minimum and a maximum. And in this case, 3 sections. It can be 2 sections. It can be 4 sections, like 4 quartiles. Can be 5, whatever the organization likes. But then we have obviously an issue with the underliers and how much it is going to cost to bring them into the pay band. And we have an issue with the ones above, so outliers above a pay band, and how to deal with them. Sometimes it's a welcome excuse to freeze their pay. And in some cases, they are working in job families that might require their own set of pay bands. So that's one thing that you can do. And when I look at a feature like an internal comparison analysis or salary range penetration, so here we would see how the salaries are distributed in terms of a comparison analysis or in terms of salary range penetration, and how much it would cost to bring everybody up to minimum or to midpoint of the structure. It's just demo data. But that's the principle when you use some kind of compensation structure. Try to have everyone within and use the compensation structure really as the tool to define the minimum and maximum and your ability and willingness to pay as an organization. So that's one thing, design of internal pay bands. And of course, and this is becoming more and more important, a gender pay gap analysis, where we not only look at the unadjusted gender pay gap, where we would run male versus female salaries, but also we would look at, let's say, a distribution of incumbents across the grades. And here we would see the infamous glass ceiling in our demo case here above grade 12, where no women are on high rated or highly graded jobs in grade 13 and above, just men. And this is a very, very typical picture that we still see in many organizations. You know, women on either semi-skilled labor or skilled labor, and the top positions for senior professionals, as well as experts and leadership roles held by men. Still very typical. Or distribution of salaries where you would compare the medians of the men versus the medians of the women, and the same for average. Or, and this is something that runs in the background, it's a regression-based analysis where we would take into account the grade as well. And even if we take into account the grade and the average or median, we would see a pay difference of 5 or 6%. It's less than the unadjusted gender pay gap of maybe 30 or 34%, but there's still a gender pay gap that cannot yet fully be explained. So that's the other approach to analyzing for equal pay, or in this case, for the gender pay gap.
And in this context, you have the adjusted and unadjusted. So can you and I know that you were talking about the adjusted having more of that defined group of comparable jobs. Mm-hmm. Can you just explain those two real quickly for our audience here?
So the unadjusted gender pay gap is really the dumped gender pay gap. So that's the one that many lawmakers are asking to be reported, and it's it just shows an imbalance in earnings. So here we would use, for example, the average of all male salaries and compare to the average of all female salaries for base pay. And in this case, the gender pay gap is, the unadjusted gender pay gap is at 30%, which is a lot. But when we look at the demographic data, it becomes clear why this is the case, because there are no women in grades 13 and above. And there's a significantly larger share of senior professionals that are male compared to female senior professionals. But when we then take into account the grade, and this is something that you can see with the distribution of salaries. So here in grade 13, 14, and 16, all of the salaries are from male job holders. And here we have the female job holders on the grades. And when we factor the grade in and do it by average, we're going to see that, and this is the regression that runs in the background to give us an adjusted gender pay gap analysis, we see that it shrinks from 30 to 5.16%. And when we factor in not only the grade, but maybe an organizational unit, so here, organizational unit and average, it shrinks even further to 2.72%. And if we also take into account age and length of service, so this is one for average, it goes down to 2%. So instead of showing a very remarkable gender pay gap of 30%, the actual gender pay gap is more like 2 or maybe 3%, because a lot of it can be explained by the organization unit that someone is in or the job family that the job holders are in.
That's really helpful. Thanks a lot for that, Philip. And so this is something that is becoming more of a hot topic in a lot of different regions of the world. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I mean, feel free to reach out to Philip or even myself, and we can take you through that tool and how and how you can use it for your own needs.
And
so,
Sandrine just said something very important. Yes, you're absolutely right. We still have a diversity and inclusion problem. Absolutely. And this is the unfortunate reality that we see in many organizations. Women are not climbing the ranks as quickly as the men are. And it's due to many different factors. It's about childcare. It's about the availability of childcare. It's about ideas of societies of what women are supposed to do. Looking at Italy, a lot of the care work goes into the hands of the women, and there's not as much professional, for example, elderly care available as in other countries, which means that women are often forced out of their jobs and into a care role, even though this is not something they had planned for. There's just nothing else available. And I mean, these are huge problems, and these are problems that the European Union is trying to tackle, that individual states in the United States are trying to tackle, that countries in Africa are trying to tackle, and it's going to take time. And one of the things that they can easily do is to talk about the gender pay gap. But for many companies, it's just an exercise of being compliant and of reporting something, and it's not really an exercise of changing things internally. I mean, there's a huge trend when it comes to diversity and quality and inclusion reporting in the United States, and there are dozens of startups that are providing some kind of service or selling some kind of service nowadays, but it's not yet global. It's far from global, really.
Yeah, the good news is that we're actually being encouraged to start to look at this now. We're looking at these, we have these tools that can show these differences, and so we can start chipping away at the problem.
And it's a huge market, especially when it comes to DE&I analysis. There are many tools available, and when it comes to just doing pay equity analysis, there are several tools available too, like Curo compensation, Gap Square, Syndio, just to name 3. There's a tool from Iceland that does an amazing job. So there's a lot going on in the market. And those DE and I tools, there are even more. They're not as good when it comes to pay equity analysis, but to look at other factors and to try to find out what's good in your organization or what is bad in your organizations, they do a pretty good job.
So if a person wants to learn more about Gradar, I know that they can contact us, but what if they just want to play around with the tool? How do they go about with that, Philip?
They can go on the website and sign up for a free trial. No strings attached. There are going to be a few automated emails, but no cold calling, nothing. So we're not very good at sales.
But it's very easy. Yes, just go to gradar.com, and I think. Oh, could you pull up the website really quick there, Philip, and just show everybody where the button to push, I guess, is on there. So I think it's on the front page and you scroll on down.
Okay, so there are two things that I like about this new homepage. We have this on-demand demo. I think it's about 12 minutes and gives a lot of details about the software. And then we have this get started for free button, which is basically a sign up form. And you can see we just asked for name and email address and password and country. And that's it. No phone number, no size of company, nothing. Just, sign up and try it. Or if you want to talk to someone from the team, you can click on this request a demo button and then sign up via Calendly. And this one goes to the team in Germany. But when I look at the US page, not UD, this one goes to the team in the United States. Oh, it's actually with Sam and his people. So yeah.
Great. Hey, well, thank you so much, Philip, and taking us through this. I know that we're running towards the top of the hour. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we conclude today?
We didn't talk about this question before, so I have no idea. No, I think compensation benefits is one of the hottest topics in the market right now, especially when you are in HR. And I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years and I can't remember a time when it was this exciting. So I'm glad that I'm doing this and that I'm here right now. And just hope that, that all of us are going to be around for a couple of more years so that we can enjoy doing compensation and benefits together.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is an exciting time in this field. I mean, I remember when I first started, everybody was doing the same thing for 50 years. And now we're starting to finally get some differentiation in practices and there's some creative thinking around the field. And so it's a very exciting time. I think most important piece is that people are finding that when we think about total rewards, pay is not the only thing. We need to think about other aspects of career development and opportunities and flexibility, and how do we pay global nomads? How do we pay people that want to that are hybrid in the hybrid environment? So there's a lot of different things to think about nowadays. And so yes, definitely a very exciting time.
And people are not just a resource, just like Sandrine said in the chat. When you start comparing health benefits, when you start comparing childcare benefits, parental leave, maybe we're going to see some kind of harmonization on a global level, because some states or some governments are very progressive and others are decades behind. And why not ask your employer, if you're working remotely, for paid parental leave or for proper healthcare benefits? So this is going to be very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining us once again on the Rewards Mastermind. It's great to hear the updates on how great ours coming along, and just been so exciting to see the addition of the fair pay analysis that you showed, and the ease of looking at the graphs and doing the analysis. I think the important thing to remember as compensation practitioners out there is, yes, knowing Excel is quite important and how to be able to manipulate data, but we need to stay on top of the tools and things that can do things faster and have a higher quality output is going to be very important for our profession in the future. So do embrace these tools, take a look at them, and dive in for sure. All right, well, thank you so much, Philip. It's been a pleasure once again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Sam.
Right. Bye, everyone. Okay.